Do you have a player in mind that you would love to work with? Is there one player in the world?
One of my favourite players that I'm not working with, like Vitinha, I love him. Just my sort of player, clever, quick, technical, that sort of thing.
Hi and welcome to Coaching Session. This week I am joined by individual skills coach Saul Isaksson-Hurst. Sal, you've worked within the academies of the likes of Chelsea and Arsenal, but you now find yourself working independently with players. Tell me, how did that happen?
Before I started with academy football, I had my own coaching business and I was like an individual specialist. Basically, I started my career in America coaching after university, and then privates were a big thing over there. I came back and started a coaching business, like a conventional coaching business, doing camps and stuff like that, but soon realised, well, my niche, or there was a need for individual coaching. There wasn't much. We're talking about 22 years ago in England. There wasn't not many people doing it. Also, I liked the business model, working individually, less overheads, facility hires, etc. So I focused quite quickly in on individual training. Built a name for myself in terms of getting players signed in academies, developing them. So then when I got my job, first at Tottenham and then at Chelsea, I was always like an individual specialist anyway, a skills specialist. I decided to leave Chelsea, probably one of the toughest decisions in my life in terms of career-wise, because I really believed in my coaching business and my personal football coach as well, which is my online app. It's just too much juggling everything. So then I really focused in on my own business, my own career, and I work as a consultant as well across, academy football.
How did you, get some of the superstars that you've worked with? You've got Madueke behind you, you've got Aaron Shirts behind you, you've also worked with Semenyo, Ismail Assar. How did you get in contact with these players?
They get in contact with me. Well, Max was one of the original ones. I started working with Max when he was 14. His dad got in contact with me, through my website and, conventional way like that. And he didn't have a club for 2 years. We just trained together, and then he ended up getting scholar and then ending up on the Golden Boy list. So, and then I suppose, you get press, momentum comes. Noni had been working with nearly 5 years when he started at PSV. He came, he was looking for a trainer. His agent contacted me. That relationship went really well. And then, obviously, the power of the gram, really. Do you know what I mean? Other set players seeing Noni do well and seeing our sessions. And then, Semenyo came through that as well, because I'd worked with some of his friends as well in his circle. So, like football is a small world. It's a small network. So, if you're doing something, well, and it's the same when you're in academy football, you're a coach, you're good at what you do, or you get results. I think word travels fast and, your reputation precedes you.
So, for example, you're working with Madueke and Semenyo. Let's talk about those two at the top of the Premier League. They've got games constantly. How do they find time to work with you as an individual coach? Is that something they do in the off season? Is it something you do weekly, monthly? Talk to me. How is that set up?
Yeah, it's difficult. The predominant work is done in the off season, and then it's when and where we can get sessions in. Obviously now it's difficult. The two players, Noni and Antoine, those two guys, there's such a hectic schedule, particularly now. It's difficult to get sessions in. Sometimes it might with Noni, he'd come down once a week. Sometimes it'd be once a month. Depends on when he can squeeze it in. So it's difficult, with those, especially those guys, all the guys, Sarr as well, and all those guys are all playing European football. It's a congesting calendar. The busiest time for me is always in the off season, because that's when you get the bulk of your work done.
Do you have relationships with the club, or do they just give you the freedom to go and manage the load and do what you see best?
When Noni first started, when he signed at Chelsea, he said, look, this is one of the first conversations. He said, I want to work with Saul. Can we work on the training ground? I said, no, you can't. But, just be aware. So, I think, listen, players are going to do it, because the reality is players maybe aren't getting what they need in those group sessions. For example, most sessions will be, possession, positional work, boxes, if you like. How much in time are they getting to practice those individual actions, those game-changing actions? They're paid a lot of money to do. So, in Ice, I don't really have a relationship with the clubs. They're probably not a massive fan of what I do. I'm very conscious of the loading, and with the player, we sort of monitor that. But in terms of what the sessions, the sessions within the season look a lot different to what they do out the season. Not doing lots of high-intensity running, for example. So you're conscious of that. As a player, you got to get those reps in. You got to feel comfortable. You got to feel confident on the ball.
I completely 100% agree with you, because it's been a big thing for me. As I transition to a coach, I'm kind of questioning why, especially in today's football, we don't work on the individual side of the game. Everything, as you said, is possession-based. Everything is tactical. But what about the individual moments that create that? I mean, Bielsa's obviously famous for it, but aside from him, there's not many coaches that do focus in individual stuff. I've got a question for you that I'm just so curious to find out, right? So you're working with these, let's say you're working on a weekly basis with some of these players. I mean, you certainly have in the past, right? Especially when the game load's been lighter. Do you change your sessions every week, or are you a big believer in like repetition of the same action in order to master the skill?
I think like a lot of my work is around individual tactics. So, we talk like someone about, what position do you play? What are the game-changing moments in your position? So we'll work on those a lot. And there'll be variations, but there'll be a lot of similarities as well. For example, as a Noni, breaking that line to shoot across or get a pass. Do you know what I mean? So there's lots of repetition, and we'll practice, but there's variation within that. But then he'll come to me and say, look, for example, I'm this area here I need to work on, or I'll watch a game. So we'll identify another area to work on or issue or, thing to improve. And then we address that. But I mean, there's lots of us, you work geographically in the areas of the pitch you want to, you relate to. So everything's really important to get context of what you're doing. You know what I mean? So well, this is what we work on. This is why we're doing it. And a lot of my work's around the 1v1 duel. So for example, can I break pressure and break the line? So either I've got the defender in front of me, maybe defender behind me, or defender on the side. So lots of movements and actions around that situation. And then obviously end product's key. What you're going to do after that, then practice the cross, or if it's a shot or a finish or whatever.
Do you do most of your sessions unopposed, or do you get other players into?
Yeah, I was all unopposed, because also then you got Antoine Semenyo on, and you got a live 1v1, and someone 2-foots him, and I really am a scourge of the thing. So yeah, and you don't really necessarily need it. The passive pressure is enough. So you work on different movements in terms of receiving, movements before you receive, high intensity. You always got a goalie. So you have that there as well. So just get players comfortable in terms of the receiving, to be able to move, to break the line, to break pressure, and then to obviously play forward.
Do you feel there's a mental impact? Do you feel that there's a real need for this to grow mentally, or is it more just the physical side that you're looking at?
Yeah, I think it's always mental, and even like a basic thing about confidence, isn't it? Having that confidence and getting that rhythm on the ball and, situations. So for me, it's like, Noni mentioned it to me the other day in terms of like, he likes the session because of the pictures. We see the pictures. So what I mean by that is, we're trying to recreate those actions, those pictures in the game. And when he comes to it, then he can get those off. So that's what my job is trying to create those game-like scenarios, with passive pressure, even it's like a mannequin. So when they get into it, they have that, they'll be able to, deliver it unconsciously, if you like. So that's what it is. And it's about how building that confidence. And we talk always, as you're constantly talking to players anyway, aren't you? Discussing it, what's going on in the game, what's been happening, how you're getting on with the gaffer, that sort of thing. So you constantly, got your psychologist hat on, in terms of, you're trying to be reinforced and be confident. And, lots of players, you're not in the squad this week, or you're on the squad, there you're talking about, the ups and downs. So I think that's, whatever level, if you're like an academy football individual specialist like myself, you're always, talking to players like that.
Yeah, I agree. I think the relationship with the player is the first and foremost, right? So having that relationship, they trust you, they are comfortable with your suggestions, with your advice, because it's important, right? If you've got that relationship where players aren't wanting to take on board what you're saying, it's broken from the very beginning, right? So I do believe a large part of that. I was just kind of really curious about the mental side of it, the impact it has, because I mean, for example, I'm a centre-back, right? And I've had loads of dips during my career. How would you improve me as a centre-back? Have you got certain drills for centre-backs, or would it be a conversation? Would it be a watching games? Talk me through. If I come to you today and go, right, I'm having a mare here, so I need some help.
Yeah, I think, listen, it's a combination of things. You say, look, this is what I want to work on, and I have a look at your footage, your clips, and say, this is what you should work on. It's key, you're talking about football at the highest level as a modern-day centre-backs, these things you're going to need to do. It's a lot about what's in possession. Obviously, it's winning the ball, but then it's that transition from, out of possession to in possession. And as a centre-back, you've really got to be like a deep line playmaker. You've got to be able to good on the ball, to be able to play over, around or through, being able to join in, break the line. So in answer to your question, a lot of the stuff will be aerial control, bringing it down, being able to break pressure and then drive, step in, whether it's combination play, whether it's driving a few yards. A lot of players can't do that. Lots of distribution, left foot, right foot, diags, playing through. So all those things really is about, right, can we win the ball? How does it look like when we win the ball? And then what is that? First couple of sessions look like, how can I play forward? How can I be positive? And we talk about the 3 R's, being able to receive, retain and release, even as a central defender, being able to, like a deep line playmaker almost, being able to be comfortable on the ball, protect it, but also being able to courage to try and, break in and make a difference.
Yeah, the courage that you mentioned there, I think, is probably the key part of being a
I think that's a lot of people miss as well. It's that, just the confidence and courage on the ball. And if you don't have quality ball mastery, control of the ball, you're going to have a lack that confidence in those in those areas. And even like keepers these days, keepers say, "Oh, what should I be doing?" So this is probably even more attributed to you. If you're not comfortable in possession and being able to attract pressure and then being able to play around, you're going to have a very low ceiling in terms of where your career is going to go. So that's why it's at the young ages, particularly, we got to hammer this sort of work in terms of the ball mastery to be able to make players comfortable on the ball, not only good technically, but also good movers with the ball, balance on both sides, be able to, cut my left and my right, change both sides, have the comfort. So when the pressures come, I don't even have to think about it.
What age do you start working with? Do you have an age that you sort of go, right, you're a bit too young, develop a little bit, or is it just as young as they approach you?
Yeah. I mean, listen, people approach me all the time at ridiculous ages. Someone emailed me a few years ago with a 1-year-old they wanted me to coach, but it's crazy. But listen, I say normally, if you're a good player, 8, 7, 8, 9, the earlier you start, the better. I'm not saying with me in terms of just getting players on the ball, lots of experiences, and then when you get to that, under 8s. On the 9s, that's a good time to really start focusing on, in that manipulation and supporting players into developing, like I say, not just the technique, but that body for the modern game.
Do you have a player in mind that you would love to work with? Is there one player in the world?
Funny, everyone's asked me that. I'm not sure really. I like look working with all players. Any player is a blessing. My favourite player at the moment, probably one of my favourite players that I'm not working with, Vitinha. I love him. He's like my sort of player, clever, quick, technical, that sort of thing. So, there's, yeah.
How would you improve him?
Well, that's the challenge, isn't it? How do you add something? How do you add value? That's a challenge, And a lot of players, even like these guys, Noni and Antoine come to me. So I just put them in environments which challenge them. That's the key, So we challenge. Right? How can I challenge them? So in terms of just might be, receiving on the move and the ball coming in 100 miles an hour, half volleying the ball and receiving it to try and break pressure with the movement before and stuff like that. I still talk about Flo Balogun a lot. I work with him as always at Monaco, like a real intense, serious guy. And, and he's I think that's, like you said, he trusts. He's when I come, he knows I'm going to put a session on, which is going to challenge him and, and put him in situations which can be uncomfortable and he has to deliver and stuff like that. So I think that's what those players want. They're always going to turn up. They know it's game specific, it's position specific, and they're going to come out thinking, I've had a workout there, and that's been a good session.
Do you feel like a real sense of pride?
Absolutely. If you're watching, I'm watching, Match of the Day or Champions League, and you see someone do something that you worked on in training, it's amazing. I think, it's unbelievably, proud and humbling. But, that's, but it just goes to show, you could do it at that level. Imagine what you can do with at the younger level.
Yeah, I completely agree. Listen, Sal, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. I wish you all the best.
Amazing. Appreciate it, Stephen, man.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode of Coaching Session, please hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment below with your thoughts on individual training.